Hi there. Welcome to the Sober Circle channel. Enjoy this speaker tape.
Yes, now come on back here. Thank you. I am very happy to be here. I was in my room a while ago getting dressed, and well, I couldn't help but to think how my life has changed. Who would ever believe that if I should stay sober, that one day I would receive calls from Keith all the way from Amarillo, Texas. I never heard of such a place. And I have one of the twins who I call him an intellectual, and he looked it up and he said, it's in Texas all right. But I was sitting there thinking how my life has changed. If someone had told me when I first was invited to Alcoholics Anonymous that if I should stay sober, this would happen to me, I certainly would have never believed it. It's healthy for me to look back. It's one among many rewarding experiences I have been given in life. Because attending a lot of meetings and listening to speakers from all walks of life, I have been given an education to know something about my sickness, something about myself, and something about my life today. And when I look back today, I can see so much that I have passed by for many years in my life. I was in a mission one night. I was in my 20s. When another Indian fella came to see me. I have once met him before in Tupper Lake, New York. I lived in the Skid Row for 7 years. And in those years, I traveled steady, slowly, but steady. And one night, I was in Tupper Lake, New York. I walked into a bar room, and Ike came to see me, and he said that he knew my father. I have never met him before, but he drank with my father. He brought me to his home. I met his wife. She was a nurse. And I stayed there. The next morning I left. And a few years went by. And when Ike lost everything, and he wound up in Salvation Army in Syracuse, New York, and he started to attend meetings. And someone told him that I was in a mission and I was sober. So he walked in one night and he says, would you like to come to an AA meeting with me? And I said, no. Because first place, I didn't know what AA was. And especially after he told me that there were about 200 people there. Well, I wasn't dressed well. I have been on a drunk for a long time. And I always had trouble with wine sores. And usually it took about 2 or 3 weeks before my face would clear up. And usually I never go anyplace. And so I didn't want to go anyplace. I said to me, well, they have coffee and donuts and they are free. So I said, we'll go. And I walked into the central group in Syracuse, New York, a group like, well, people like you. A man who greeted me at the door, who became a good friend sometimes later in life. He was a lawyer and been sober for 13 years and a very well-to-do man. And his job every Friday night, he stood at the door and he shook hands for everyone who walked in there. And one night it was me, and when he seen me, my long hair and wine sores and dirty, he rushed over and he grabbed my hand with his 2 hands and he says to me, am I so glad to see you. And I sit down and then a lady got up. My first speaker in AA was a lady judge. And first time I heard the judge said, if you are new, please try to identify. And I didn't know what in the hell she was talking about. Because here I was, in my 20s. I have been away from my reservation since at the age of 14. I went to lumber camp in Patton, Maine, where I spent 4 years of washing dishes. When I was 18, I was suggested by my boss that why don't I join the army and join the younger people. So I went to Quebec City, where I joined Canadian Infantry, where I spent 3 years and a half washing more damn dishes. And I took a drink when I was 21 years old, and I lived in the Skid Row for 7 years. And here I am. I have never been married, never owned a car, never had a driving license. I'm sitting there with long hair and wine swords, and I'm dirty. Never went to school. I couldn't read and write. And I'm in a mission supposed to pay 35 cents a night, and I'm behind 3 weeks' rent. I had some financial problems. And listening to Lady Judge telling me, please try to identify. And, you know, the first thought came to my mind, I got to get the hell out of here. And it isn't that I have never met a judge before. I met one particular judge 43 times. And he never once asked me to try to identify. Last time we met, I thought it was very touching. He calls me John. And night before I have just accepted Christ as my personal Savior. I was in a mission trying to get a bed, and Tom, who runs the mission, if you go to services, he'll always give you a bed. So I was sitting there when a fellow got up, and he said that for many years he was a bum just like us. Must have been a very spiritual man. He said one night in this mission, he accepted Christ as his personal Savior, and since then, his entire life has changed. He got married, bought a home, just bought a new station wagon. He has a nice job. I guess he kind of touched me. He said, any of you boys can do the same thing. All you have to do is move forward and accept Christ as your personal Savior. Well, I didn't thought that was just so difficult to do. So I moved forward, and I didn't know anything about the Christ he was talking about. The 4 years that I spent in lumber camp, I used to listen to lumberjacks talking about him. And by the time they finished with him, you wouldn't believe him either. But this guy was sincere. I kneeled down, and he kneeled down next to me, and he said, son, you're saved. Well, next morning, I'm facing the judge. And one look at Judge, I knew damn well I wasn't saved. But he did call me John. He says to me that the Fayette Park, you're in the city, that's for the decent people to go there on Sundays. It's not a place for people like you. Then he says to me, you know, you Indians, that's all you want to do. You come to this city, you work for 1 week, you get drunk, and then you get into a fight. That's all you want to do, he said, is fight. Then he took his glasses off and he gave me 6 months in Jimmyville. And I said to myself, well, this guy, you don't like Indians anyway, because he's bald-headed. And I figured maybe my great-grandfather got to him first, and he has a big back. So here I am in an AA meeting listening to a lady judge. I often said, if you was to organize AA, you should never have chosen a lady judge for me to be my first speaker. But that was 23 years ago, and I have not as yet taken a drink. right after the meeting, I was ready to leave because it takes a lot of understanding in AA and a lot of people who care before you can remove a lot of things about your life that cause you to feel, like Betty said this morning, I'm different. And one of the beautiful things about my life that I really don't know too many people here. I know Joe from Arkansas, that you will be your speaker tomorrow morning, who is a friend of mine. I have heard Jim, who is the best speaker I've heard in AA, who will speak tonight, and a couple of other people. But the first thing I experienced when I walked in yesterday was the feeling of belonging. It is something that I have experienced in Alcoholics Anonymous the very first night I came here, because as I was leaving, because the lady judge made me very uncomfortable. In the first place, I didn't understand what in the hell she was talking about. I memorized her talk 2 years later, and I still didn't understand what in the hell she was talking about. She would start her talk by saying that it's a mental obsession that precedes the first drink. And once you take a drink, now it's coupled with a physical compulsion. And I said, holy Christ. I used to say, if I have her disease, it sure is I class. But I didn't. And she talked about her father being a judge and her husband is a director in a general hospital. And here I am, my father was a drunk. And I don't even understand the words she was using. So I was leaving, and this lawyer who stood at the door, been watching me, I often think about him. The other night, he has since passed away many years ago. I was in the step meeting the other night, and in 11th step, and there is a little prayer in 11th step about St. Francis. And in my area, they read the steps. And the prayer talks about, Lord, I pray that I may understand rather than to be understood. That I may love rather than to be loved. And this man understood. As I was leaving, he grabbed me again, and he put his arms around me, and he said to me, you know, I have some friends here, and I want you to meet them. And this is where I felt that I belonged, because people told me that they could help me, and that they wanted me to come back. It was a simple honesty, that you don't have to be smart to recognize. And I left first time in my life, and I believe that what I have been given in my first meeting, it is perhaps something much greater than the words could have given me about the nature of my sickness. I think when you are lost in life, what you really want more than anything else, certainly not advice, but somebody who cares, somebody who understands, and someone who loves. And that's what I felt from my first meeting. And somebody asked me one night what was the best thing that I have ever done since I sobered, and I said, I came back. I came back. I have always been an active member of Alcoholics Anonymous. It's been a good life for me. My father was like me. He was a drunk. The only thing I remember about my father, that he sang in a little church in a reservation. And I used to watch him standing there, sweat running down his face. But the thing that I really remember, that one day he was so drunk that two Indians carried him out. And they put him outside, and he tried to get up and he falls. And, you know, I don't know why, but that's all I remember. He died, and 5 years later, we lost 8 members in our family. I had twin brothers who died in the same year. They all died with TB. When I was 13, my mother was dying. And after she died, I couldn't find a home. I think that perhaps in those days, people were afraid of TB. So I lived in this old empty house for about a year with a dog. And I'm from a little reservation in Canada. I was there 2 weeks ago. One of my friends, one of my old girlfriends, she died in the cirrhosis of the liver. So I was there 2 weeks ago. And it already snows over there. So it's a rugged country. I could identify with Betty this morning. I am a dreamer. I remember that year I slept in an old empty house, and I used to say to myself that someday I would leave home, and I would find me a nice home, and I'll have nice clothes, and a nice car, and a nice girl, and a nice job. Because I felt that if you have these things, then you would feel the same way that other people felt who had these things. So when I was 14, I grabbed a freight and I left home. Because Indians in reservation, they used to talk about lumber camps in Maine. And I arrived in Patton, Maine. I asked the man if I could get a job in a lumber camp, and of course I was young, too young to be hired. He said to me, the camp is 26 miles in woods, the TT camp. If you want to, you can try. So I walked 26 miles, and I arrived in lumber camp, and I met a man by the name of Bill Langster, who became a great friend. He gave me a job where I spent 4 years. And oftentimes he would bring me home. He had 3 daughters. As a matter of fact, his family suggested, when I was 18, that it was unwise and unhealthy for me to live in a lumber camp with an older people, that I should leave and join the younger people. So I went to Quebec City. Now, I had no intentions at all of washing dishes. It didn't bother me in lumber camp. But I think that I am like most people, I suppose. I was hoping that maybe I can make something out of myself, maybe winning a medal or two without getting hurt. Because among many things I have learned in my recovery, that I'm an extremely sensitive person. I get hurt easily and I don't suffer well. I didn't realize that if you don't have no education, you couldn't go on training. And I joined the Canadian Infantry, and they gave me a job washing dishes. And I never went home. I had plans of going home. And I can identify with a lot of alcoholics about being so sensitive or being self-centered. I don't know which. Whatever it was, that it was so unhealthy within me that I didn't want anybody to know about it. I never went home. The reason I joined the Canadian Infantry was because if I got a pass, I could go home. I never went home. I never once liked my service in the Canadian Army. I felt that if you wash dishes, you're not as good as the next person, which is another sick way, and I don't know where I've learned that. I am sure it wasn't all my idea. For our society has ways of playing games with people. I know today that quality of human life, the quality of man, has nothing to do with what kind of a job you have. It has nothing to do whether you have a degree or not. It has nothing to do whether you have an education or not. But this is years of training. I'm standing here at the age of 53, and I still don't have an education. And I certainly don't look for apologies. I never spoke in AA for 2 years because I didn't talk with English. As a matter of fact, for a long time, I used to go home and try to learn some big words. I quit. Because I have met few people in AA who are educated beyond their intelligence. And I have never taken a drink. Being a type of person I am, my father made a great impression. I think it's kind of sick, not wanting to be like your father. And I didn't want to be a drunk. When I got my discharge, I was 21 years old, and I had a friend. He said to me, let's you and I go out and get dressed up. We had a few $100s, and we each bought a suit. Then he says to me, let's you and I go to a nightclub. We'll have a few drinks, and we'll meet some girls. And I liked that because I was 21 years old, and I had never been out with a girl. This thing in me really was a problem. I guess I felt that someone might find out that I was washing dishes. And I didn't want anybody to know. And I was old enough to know that I could go out with a girl. I mean, you don't learn everything in school. Someone said, God moves in mysterious ways. We walked into a Bluery Cafe in Montreal, in the third floor. It was a nice place. They had an orchestra, and a girl sings. And that's where I took my first drink. And it is interesting to look back, because I, like I guess most of us, I liked what drink did to me. It changed me. It took away so many things that robbed me from living. When I drank, I could talk to anybody. It really didn't matter who it was, simply because when I drank, it never bothered me that I washed dishes, because I never told the truth. I become an instant liar, because it didn't fit with my state of mind when I drank. When I drank, if you didn't like me, you had problems. And I tell you about it. When I was sober, and if you didn't like me, not only did I had problems, and I was looking to do something so you could like me. There's a strange form of a sickness that deprives so many human beings from having a God-given right to choose to what they believe in life. When I drank, I could talk to anybody because I honestly felt I made a lot of sense. I went out with a girl the first night I got drunk. It was about time. Because I never was taught to believe going out with a girl was sin. That was not my problem. My problem was there is something about me is not good enough. And so, if someone had told me that night that if I should continue on drinking, that I would sleep in the sidewalk for 7 years, I would have never believed it. All I know that at the age of 21, I really have found something that made me feel like I've always wanted to feel. Like my boss said to me when I left the lumber camp, John, join the young people. I have joined the young people. But because I am an alcoholic, and because I am a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and because I have been given a new insight about myself, I take a second look. What happened the night I took my first drink? On one hand, the booze gave me a freedom that perhaps I will never have, truly. But on the other, it started to rob me right away, because I have never been a social drinker. Nobody could convince me then. When I arrived in AA, after living in the Skid Row for 7 years, I arrived here with mountains of evidence. I still could not identify. It seems to me that with all the things that happened to me as an alcoholic, didn't teach me or give me whatever it is that I needed for me to be able to see or to be able to make intelligent judgments about my life. I can identify when AA said an alcoholic rationalized, justified his drinking. The more you get into trouble, the less you are capable of seeing. And that was my problem. There were times in those 7 years that I tried. I would go and see Major Harvey in Salvation Army. Major Harvey was another fellow who always tried to help bums. I would go over there and with the thought in mind that I'll sober up. I will get me a job. I'll get me some nice clothes, maybe a girlfriend, maybe a second-hand car, and things will be better. But it never happened. And I can see today why Major Harvey used to be so confused. Because I would arrive there with long hair and wine stores. I'd been on a drunk God knows how long. And I would be dirty. And I couldn't eat. And I couldn't sleep. And for the next 3-4 days, I would walk. A week later, he would send me to a doctor to get an examination. 2 weeks later, I'm young and I'm strong and my face is clear enough. And Major Harvey would say, John, go downstairs, get you some clothes. By this time, I'm an expert on suits. I'm always as good as my sponsor. And I would get all dressed up, and he couldn't figure out that about 3 weeks or 4 weeks later, I would go back to the same things that caused me to crawl. See, outside, we try to say they don't understand. Of course they don't. They are people who make a judgment based on reason. What I'm doing is not reasonable. I go back, but my thinking is, the loneliness that I walk with most of my life, it disarms me. I am basically a proud man, maybe too much. And about the only thing that would disarm me totally is this loneliness. That I can identify so many things. It's a blessing for AA. And people used to say, I would be with 1,000 people and I would be alone. And that's my sickness. I would be in the city of New York, all alone with my own dreams. I would be dreaming. And you know that I would be sober, and nobody knew that there was anything wrong with me. But sooner or later, I would walk into a bar room because there would be someone that I can talk to, that I'm comfortable with, which is another person like myself who has nothing. And I know he's telling me lies. But it was better than nothing. When I got drunk, I tell him the same lies. He listens. Then I would buy him a drink. And someone said this morning that desperation, that few minutes of forgetting, it means so much to me. I am, I think, an intelligent person that at the end of my drinking, I didn't say, I'm going to drink to enjoy myself for this weekend. It never happened. No more. But those few minutes, it seems that it meant a lifetime for me. I never could stay so. And I guess I am like so many. When the judge once told me that park was for the decent people, he said everything that I felt about me. And I often wonder, did I believe because judge told me? Or is it that something I believed all my life? I think that I have a type of a sickness that has caused me to do things in life that made me believe that I was different. I know that. I came back to AA. In the early days, it meant nothing. I met my sponsor in AA. My sponsor was a man that I never liked. He was a bum just like me, but he was a man with a degree. And sometimes both of us would be sober in Salvation Army, and Major Harvey would give him a job working in the office. And he looked down on me because I work on a truck. And you always find the best suits downstairs, and you read books that I couldn't even understand. And once he stole my shoes and sold them. He even buy me a drink and said no hard feelings. I never liked him. When we were in jail together, he would be a barber, and I used to wash his floors, and I felt he looked down on me. But I was in Central Group one night, and Pat walked in all dressed up, like he usually does when he's sober, with a girl. He comes over, and he says to me, John, I'm your sponsor. Then he says, I have a new car outside, and he did. That was the first time I have allowed anyone to bring me home, because I didn't want people in AA to know that I was in a mission. But he used to pick me up in the mission every night. And he used to bring me and have a sandwich. He used to say, John, I can only eat half of it. And you know, it was years later I was told that Pat never eats sandwiches. It is amazing the attitude that we have towards people sometimes, only to find out that they really loved us. I remember one night after 6 months in AA, he stopped the car in the mission and said, John, I know you want to be sober, but to practice AA, you have to get out in the mission. I never thought about leaving. He said, you can't stay sober and live with those bums. But you know, I didn't want to leave. I felt that if I could stay there for some time, stay sober long enough, then maybe I could leave. But I guess God was on his side, because the damn place burned down one night. And I went to see Pat at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I said to him, mission burned down. And he said, that must be the grace of God. And next morning, he brought me to the 12-step house and gave me a job. They paid me $7.50 a week with a free bed. And my job was to wash floors, wax them, make coffee, answer the telephone, and wash dishes. And you might say, among many rewards that I have received in the program, that I have learned to live like a white man, dollar down and dollar a week. And I bought me a dishwasher. I still like to push the button today because it hums, and I say, hum, you cheap bastard. Is what But I got into trouble. I got into a lot of trouble in life, but I received a call one night from a girl I have never met. Didn't met her either. Her name was Ann, that's all I know, and it was midnight, and she needed help. There were old-timers who came to this place, and they'd play cards every night, all night. I told them that there was a girl who needed help. And after they find out who she was, they said to me, well, she's been around for a long time, and all she wants to do is use people in AA. Well, you know, I'm the type of person, I like what Father Martin says, man is a rational man, that he must function with intellect. That's what separates all the living things. And discipline is be willing to suffer because what you believe is right. I have never lived that way. I have never lived with my head. I have always reacted with my feelings. I have always reacted badly. And it took me a long time in AA to discipline myself to act on what I believe. Not always successful even today. But I'm getting older and wiser. But in those days, I didn't like what they said. I knew it was wrong, but I never knew how to handle anything when it was wrong. And I handled it the way I have always handled things. I upset the table, and I punched one of them right in his mouth. And I might add, I knocked him down right on his ass, too. And that was my first 12-step call. I have changed since then. Because they throw me out. They throw me right out. And I'm walking down Fayette Street, and I'm very mad. But thank God for fun. There are some people in the air, they're genuine people who care others. You picked me up 3 o'clock in the morning. I was walking around. I wasn't going to drink. You know, the beautiful thing about my life, I think that my first sweet sobriety An obsession to drink was removed from me. And I think second thing that helped me the most than anything else is that people in AA talk about things that I've always felt, like loneliness, fear. It took me years before I could admit fear. I had a very unhealthy attitude towards fear. I didn't felt it was part of a strong man. I felt it was a weakness that deprived a man from being a man. I didn't understood what this man was all about. And my sponsor brought me to his home. I slept on the floor, like I always did when I was in trouble. Next day he brought me to Major Harvey, and Major Harvey got me a job. This time I was sober. Same job, working on the truck for $1 a week. And I was with him for about a year and a half. And I started to travel. I went to meetings every night, and I started to travel, and I had a world directory. In those days, they weren't that big. And in my 5th year sobriety, I was still living in skids. I was traveling a lot. I hang around in the slave market and get a job for half a day. I never had a steady job. I would go to meetings every night, and I would sleep in empty cars. And I arrived in Marlboro, Mass., my turning point in my life. I was 34 years old. So over 5 years, I arrived in Marlboro, Mass., 1 o'clock in the morning. I didn't even know to call it Marlboro, Mass. It was this time of year because I took some apples out the orchard, and I arrived there, and I went to the hotel, and I slept in the men's room in a hotel. And I went to meetings there the next night, and I met some people in AA. I met a person who owned a restaurant, and he had a car, and he would bring me to a meeting. For a couple of weeks later, I was having a lunch there one morning when a waiter asked me if I knew of any contractor in town that could remodel and paint a house. I said, yes, I do. Me. She said, I didn't know you were a contractor. I said, I didn't see it. But I have built a good business. Anybody can be proud of. But, she said, would you come over and give me an estimate? I went over and I gave her an estimate to paint the house and to remodel for $300. And I got my first job. No wonder. Other contractors wanted $1,200 to $1,400. I said to Paul, who owned the restaurant, I have a job, but I don't have a room and I don't have money. He said, why don't you go back and ask Frida to give you some money to start your job? So I went to see her, and she gave me $100. And I went out and I bought some paint and some coveralls. I figured, if you're going to be a president in your own company, you might as well buy coveralls. And I bought a hammer and paint, and I carried everything to the job. And this was a huge, big house. I borrowed a ladder. I met a man in AA who worked in a telephone company. And he loaned me a ladder, although it was against the rules, I guess. I got this, I think it was a 60-foot ladder up there, and I couldn't reach the peak. So I find some old lumber under the porch, and I carried it up there. And I built a scaffold right on top of the 60-foot ladder. And that's where I started my business, right close to heaven. But in my drinking days, I used to paint people in the church because that's the only job you can get. And nobody else wanted it. So it didn't bother me any. But I thanked the guy who owned the restaurant. I would have starved because I didn't make any money. My next job was a plumber I met in AA. He said that he had a ranch house in Sudbury, which is 7 miles from where I live. And all I needed was a 10-foot step ladder. So I put all my tools together, and my coveralls and my drop cloths, and I borrowed a 10-foot step ladder. And I stood in the corner and I stopped the bus. And this guy stopped and he looks at my ladder, and he looks at me and he couldn't believe it. That look that girl was talking about this morning? He couldn't believe. He said, you're not serious. And I said, I am. I'm self-employed and I have no other means of getting to work. I think this guy must have been an alpha. He said, if I give you a ride, would you promise you'll never do it again? My next house was the school teacher. She taught school for 40 years and she retired. She was telling me all this. And I'm thinking there, and I said to her, you think you could teach me how to read and write? She said, well, I've taught thousands of people how to read and write. And you know, that didn't impress me at all. Oh, what the hell, 1,000 people? But I went to see her every night, and she was a school teacher. Oh boy, was she. 3 months later, she helped me to memorize the 69 questions, and I took the test, and I passed. And then she said to me, John, why don't you continue on your education? Because she said, you know, you have a good mind. And you know, there's something about faith that is, or believing that it is so difficult for some of us. Clint was talking about a great deal last night about that. There were a lot of things that I didn't understand. I looked upon them the way I seen them, and I didn't know that the way I see things robbed me in life. It's hard for me to let go of what I believed in, because so many things I believed in were not stupid. But I didn't realize that I could change. I didn't believe that. I felt that I know she liked me, and we became a good friend, and she was a good teacher. But I felt that she feels sorry for me now, and she's trying to tell me that I have a good mind, when it's not true. After all, here I am, almost 35 years old, and look at my record. Washed dishes for 7 years and a half, living in skits for 7 years, never been married, never owned a car. Not too long ago I was sleeping in a men's room, and now she's telling me I have a good mind. Pretty difficult, you know. But I think what Betty said this morning about a second step said, come to believe, and that key that opens the door to find a new way of life starts in believing. And he said, all you need to do is just open your mind. Just open your mind. And you know, I couldn't do that because I was convinced and I was sure that she's feeling sorry for me. Besides, that's the job I'd like to have myself anyway. And so I didn't believe. I didn't believe. A lot of things have happened since then to convince myself that, you know, I'm not a stupid person. As a matter of fact, I never was. Not that I remember in Canadian Army, I didn't want to wash dishes, so they gave me a test, and they marked me M4, which was not capable of training. And it's very difficult to rise above the entire Canadian Army. It takes 20 years, 23 years of AA with professionals to see they were wrong. They were wrong. Time came in my life a few years ago when I was hired by the government. By that time, I had a good business. I had a 14-room house. I bought my wife a new car, and I had a new car. I get a call to take over a program, pre-reservations under the mental health. The program's been there for 1 year, and they couldn't get anybody because whoever wrote it made a mistake by saying in the program that Indian has to be a director and he has to be a PhD. You got to walk a long ways to find a PhD Indian in Maine. They didn't tell me that. I find out much later. Now, they're calling me because of my example. They don't even know I never went to school. So I was interviewed, and I told them that I didn't want the job. Number one, they didn't pay me enough. By this time, a lot of things happened in my life, and it says, faith is the spirit of independence, a man who has the courage of his own convictions. Our Father Martin says, you learn to trust your own judgment. It has nothing to do whether you have a good education. It has to do because you have been able to reach across from the hand that strikes you, and you have found God that awakens the spirit. And it teaches that. I didn't take a job because he didn't pay me enough. I went back home. They called me 2 weeks later with a raise. Told you I learned to live like a white man. Well, they find out that I had no PhD. The second thing it's called in the program, otherwise you have to have a certificate of counseling. So they send me to the University of Rhode Island to take a test with 3 guys. I told them that you ask me the questions, I'll answer it, because I can write. 3 weeks later, I got out of there with a certificate. You are now looking at a man who has a certificate of counseling. The Army was wrong. And so was the judge. So was the judge. The great education in AA, it's not being phony and it's not ego, but to be able to believe when you look back. They were not right because he had a judge. He wasn't right because he represented the Army. I have learned a lot of things about myself to be grateful for who I am today. I took the job over there. While I was over there, I received a call from University of Maine. They have an adult education program and they want an Indian speaker. They pay $40 an hour. Would I be interested? I said I would. I went over there and I spoke for 1 hour, and I was so impressed with what I said, I gave them half an hour free. And so a lot of things that, when you look back, like I couldn't believe the school teacher. See, I couldn't believe her. But she loved me, and she told the truth. She taught school for 40 years. She knew that I was a sick person, not stupid. See, I needed help. There's absolutely no question about it. In my 5th year sobriety, I couldn't get off from the first step. I couldn't get into the second step where it says it opens the door for your recovery. And, you know, people in AA are nice, but sometimes nobody wants to understand. Everybody wants to give you a suggestion, but you're not ready. I remember going to a meeting one night, and I was sleeping in an empty car with a cat that nobody wanted, and I was lonely, and I listened to this guy talking about God, and I said, I'm going to ask him a question after the meeting, and I did. Of course, I didn't tell him how I felt. I never told him where I was sleeping. But I told him a little bit about myself. When he put his hand on my shoulder, he said, son, what you want to do is take a third step. And on my way out, I said to myself, what an ignorant bastard he is. You don't understand. But you see, I didn't understand. It was so confusing. And I couldn't understand school teachers at that time. But I was painting houses, and a couple of weeks later, Paul, who owned the restaurant, came to see me, and he had an 11-passenger station wagon. He said, John, you can buy this car for $700. Of course, I had no $700. He says, why don't you ask the lady upstairs, she'll give you enough money for the down payment. And I went to see her, and she gave me enough money for the down payment. And here I was in my 5th year sobriety, president in my own company. I had a driving license, and I had 11-passenger station wagon. Then I said to myself, maybe I should get me a girlfriend. But you know, I have this 4 teeth in front missing. That's the only thing I've lost in drinking. And I lost them in Syracuse. In Syracuse, New York. I hanged around in the slave market. And I get a job, work 2-3 hours, and I get paid and get drunk. That's why I work there. And one day I got a job unloading a boxcar with bricks. And Saturday afternoon I finished unload and I get paid. And I start drinking. But also in Syracuse, New York, there is a place called Smitty's. Smithers is where all the New York Indians drink. I'm a Micmac Indian. I don't drink in Smithers because Micmac and New York Indians don't communicate too well. And every once in a while, 20 of us Micmacs would get drunk and we'd go to Smithers. And we would communicate. But I'm drinking, and I have long leather gloves that I've used in unloading a boxcar Saturday afternoon. I felt strong, but I had no intention of going to Smithers. I'm walking by there. But somebody opened the door and threw the guy out. And that's where I met Smiley. Smiley is a little Irishman with a degree. He weighs about 100 pounds. So I picked him up and I said to him, "What in the hell's wrong with you?" He says, "Those Indians inside." Well, I said, "They can't do that to you." And Smiley said, "No, they can't." So I said to him, "What do you say you and I go in there and clean them out?" He said, "It's a good idea." Talking about sick. So Smiley and I went in there. Well, by the Jesus, it wasn't a good idea. Because I woke up in General Hospital, and I lost 4 teeth, and Smiley sitting there without scratch. And you know, the years went by. And I wake up in jail, and I'll be all smashed up. And Smiley was sitting there without a scratch. But you know, it's funny how you don't see the things like Betty said this morning. Or, you know, sometimes you just don't see things. But he finally dawned on me one Sunday morning because we were sitting there, and I'm so sick, and I'm all bruised. And Smiley, one way it was good. Because, you know, after a while, you know, in the early days, I loved drinking and everything went with it. I love battles, especially with cops. But at the end, the blackout, you don't know yourself. You wake up and you try to figure out what happened last night, and that's very, very fearful. But Smiley was always with me, and I said to him one morning, "How come, Smiley, I can get so messed up and you never have a scratch?" He said, "John, don't you know," he said, "I'm a college man." Smiley never fought because he was a college man. And not knowing anything about college men, that's the way I figured. So here I was, my 4 teeth was missing, and I felt that you couldn't find a decent girl with 4 teeth missing. So I met a dentist in AA, and I've been watching him for about 3 weeks. He looked mild. And that's the kind of a person I wanted, because I'm an extremely sensitive person. You know, I get hurt easily, and I don't suffer well. So I said to him one night, "I have a little problem. I wonder if you could help me." Well, he said, "What's the problem?" Well, I said, "I'm looking for a girlfriend. But I have these 4 teeth in front missing. I want you to help me to put them back." So he gave me his card, and I called the secretary, and I went to see him, and I sat down, and he opened my mouth. "And you know this guy you want to pull 14 teeth?" Before he gave me 4. And I said to myself, "This is no bargain at all. I shouldn't." Then he said he has to fill the rest of them, and I said, "How long that's going to take?" He said, "If you keep all your commitments, it'll take about 3 months. And you know, you learn in AA, you get what you need and not what you want." So 3 months later, I went to see him, and I got these teeth I have now. I was so happy, I rushed home, and I looked in the mirror, and I laughed for 2 hours. It was one of my gratitudes. I was at the meeting one night, and I met Mary. She says to me, "Someone told me that you have a new car." I said, "A station wagon with 11 passengers." She said, I run a faith house, home of an alcoholic woman. I have 9 girls, and I'm looking for someone to bring these girls to a meeting. Would you be interested?" I said, "I would." And I picked the girls up, and I bring them to a meeting, and on our way back, I said to Kathy, who is my wife today, "Would you like to go out on dates?" And she said, "No." And I've heard someone said, worst thing about alcohol is rejection. And that's true. Boy, did I suffer. You know. But on my way home, I think AA would start working for me. I said to myself, who in the hell she thinks she is? Here she is in Faith House, she's got nothing. And here I am, I'm president in my own company. I own my own car and new set of teeth. Who the hell needs her anyway? Thursday night came along and I picked the girls again, and on our way back I said to her, how about a show in Boston Sunday? She said, all right. So we went to a show in Boston, and on our way back I asked her to marry me. And she said, but I don't know you. And I said, it's all right, we still have 5 miles to go, we'll get acquainted. So we got married. We got married, and a lot of people in AA didn't thought it was a very good idea. But we stopped the car and we counted our change. We had $85. That's all we had between the two of us. We didn't know where to go. My wife comes from a family where they don't like alcoholics. In those days, they used to wear, I used to love to watch your family. They used to wear big hats with a lot of feathers. Not only they didn't like she was an alcoholic, but when they find out that she married an Indian without feathers, why did Jesus tell him like that? Now that I own a 14-room house, you can't get rid of the bastard. Kathy and I, we figured, we decided to go back to my own reservation. I've been away 21 years. It was a very bad decision, simply because I knew nothing about myself. Emotionally, I have not as yet come to believe. It says the only way that you can balance your emotions is through spiritual ingredients in life. I knew nothing about it. We went back. There is something about, I think, that we all have a past. Some of us more painful than others. I don't know whether I was emotionally conditioned as such that I could not live with my past, or whether it is true that sometimes things happen in our past that we can't handle them. In my house, after my father died, we were poor. And when I was sleeping with my mother at the age of 13 when she was dying, I asked her one morning, if I was going to die too. She said, no. She said, you're different. You're very strong, and I'm so proud of you because you never cry. She said that because my family used to cry a lot. I have twin brothers who cry a lot because they were hungry. They went blind. My mother used to write notes to an Indian agent, and she would be wrapped them around my hands, and I would carry them 14 miles and walk back. And for those 5 years, I made a lot of trips. Something happened in my life that I never quite understand. It's not important. And when my family would cry, my mother would say, it's all right. And it's amazing that she never lost her mind. Had such faith. And I make many trips, but there was no food. The thing that caused me that I remember the most, was the last time when she asked me to see an Indian agent because she wanted a jar of Vaseline. She's been in bed for a couple of years and she couldn't get up. And I carry a note. And I gave it to an Indian agent, and he read it and he threw it on the snow. And he shut the door in my face. And I learned to hate. And going home, my mother said it was all right. But when I hit that house where the Indian agent lived, something happened to me inside. And I never really understood it. And perhaps I never will. But it doesn't bother me anymore because, I talked about a prayer of St. Francis a while ago that I identify with lawyer. But it also applies to me. When he says, Lord, let me be the instrument of thy will, for where there is hate, I will bring love. Where there is sadness, I will bring joy. Where there is darkness, I will bring light. Where there is doubt, I will bring faith. Then he says, Lord, I pray that I may understand rather than to be understood. I've heard that a long time ago. Like I say, I'm an intelligent person. A long time it takes me to understand. But if I'm going to walk with God, then first of all, I have to do what I'm asked. Hate is separation of God, whether it's justifiable or not. No man glories with hate. Hate is a tool of self-destruction. I have a lot of it. When I was sober, I strike in. When I was drunk, I strike out. And I didn't give a damn what I did. I have always been like that. Then it taught me something. Father Martin says, learn to live with your head. And among many wonderful things that I have in my life, I don't hate. I just don't hate. Amazing. I have always loved people. I have never once let go out to hurt anybody. I believe that. I've hurt a lot of people. But I have never intentionally gone out to hurt. No more than I would do today. But I didn't know it. So here I am, back to reservation. And I took off. Kathy and I took off. We arrived back to Marlborough. We had $35 left. And I was very disturbed. So we moved into a 3-room apartment and paid $35, $13 a week. And when we moved there, we had absolutely nothing except the coffee table that was given to us from a faith house. And even newlyweds cannot sleep in coffee tables. So we slept on the floor. But you can have a lot of fun on the floor, too. Some people identify with that. I do. I spoke in White Plains, New York at one time. Even Alfie's are rich over there. And I mentioned the fact that you can have a lot of fun on the floor. And after the meeting this week, the older lady, she says to me, young man, I don't know how much fun you can have on the floor, she said, but I know you can have a lot of fun on the Oriental rug. So I said to her, at least you identify. So Kathy and I moved into a 3-room apartment, $13 a week, and I said to her, I would like to have a boy because I'm the only one left. And if you give me a boy, I'll buy you a diamond. What a thing to offer a girl when you're sleeping on the floor. But the beautiful thing about Kathy and I, she was sick enough, so she believed me. And this Christmas, she was in a hospital waiting for a boy, and I walked into a bank. First time in my life, I wanted $200, and they wouldn't give it to me because I didn't have a collateral. And I didn't even know. Nobody in AA talks about collateral. I didn't know what in the hell it was. I was smart enough to say, well, what is it? I didn't say that. I went to see my friend Paul, and I told him about collateral. Well, he said, John, what you want to do is pray. I said, Christ, Paul, they don't need God, they need collateral. And that's another thing you got to watch in AA. We can tell ourselves lies by thinking that everything comes by asking God. I don't think so. I think that we are so fortunate that it was God who gave us the free will to choose. And I think faith is a choice from the free will of man. And I went to 3 banks, and they told me the same thing. You know, it's funny. The other night, I was at the meeting, and Paula came to me. He's the president in the bank. It's at the AA meeting now. He says, how come you never come to see me in my office? You're walking to my bank all the time. He said, I'm the president there. I know you were the president. I said to him, well, for one reason, I'm afraid that you might spoil my image. He's still trying to figure it out. But they wouldn't give me $200. So I went to Hudson, and I met a gentleman over there who was retiring that year. And I told him the story about my wife and about baby. And well, he said, I don't loan money that way either. He said, but I've always tried it myself when I've seen an honest face. And he says, well, how much do you want it anyway? And you know, he sounded so good. I said, $400. And I got the money, and I walked into the jeweler's store, and I said to Alan, give me the best diamond that you have. And he showed me one. And I said, show me the cheapest one that you have. And he showed me one for $160, I guess. And I said, I'll take that. And he said, you want to charge it, of course? I said, of course. And I brought my wife a diamond in a hospital, and I waited home. And middle of the night, she calls me, and she's crying. She said, honey, it's a girl. And that's when I start growing in the program. You get what you need and not what you want. And I was hurt because if I didn't told you, I want you to know that I'm a very sensitive person. I get hurt easily and I don't suffer well. But next Christmas came along and she was in hospital again. I received a call and she's still crying. She said, honey, it's a girl. But you know, by this time we're told that example is our great teacher. So I went over to see her and I said to her, honey, don't worry about it. Just have an open mind and we'll try again. I learned that in the program. So next Christmas came along. My wife is in there again and I received a call and she's still crying. This time it's twin boys. So I got scared. So I rushed over and I said to her, well, you said that next Christmas we hang our stockings and wait for Santa. We did well for a couple of years, then the girl came along, and a couple of years later the boy came along, and now we have 6 children. And in closing, I perhaps sometimes think about what I have received in AA. More that comes from people. I can identify things that come from people. I honestly believe that God's word is true to us. Number one, I am grateful that I have been given a type of a state of mind that I can look back and to examine and to see. In my past, I have met people, truly people who cared about me. That for me is my gratitude. It's intelligence. I can see it and I know it. Today, I know that I have a type of a friend in this life only because of the fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous. A person like me, where I come from, without an education, perhaps I would have never met some people that I have met in life and called friends. Society, I play games with people. We don't, thank God. I have one friend who has just died. He was a real example for me. He died 7 years. He fought with cancer. He was a millionaire, professor in English, and professional wrestler. I have years ago met him when I spoke in Beach Hill Farm. He was a patient there, and someone was sitting there writing down everything I said. That was the first time I felt important. When he died, years of conversation in his room upstairs, there was piles of paper. A lot of them he said, and John the Indian said this. 2 weeks before he died, I went to see him, and his wife said he couldn't walk anymore. He loved Robert Frost, and he would love to teach me about Robert Frost, and I don't understand Robert Frost because he talks too well in English. And the only thing I know about Robert Frost, the little prayer he says, Lord, forgive me for all the little tricks I played on you, and I'll forgive you for a big one you played on me. But he would memorize it, and he would act like an actor. And when he knew I was coming, he would do that. And then we sit down, and we would talk. The thing about it, one morning, I was called on full of Sebjob's man and wife, who've been sober 4 years, I guess it was, but they're having a marriage problems, and I stopped by there. And I left very uncomfortable that day because there was so much yelling and fighting. So from there I went to see Gibby. And Gibby was on a wheelchair. And I walked in, and the thing that struck me more than anything else was the spirit of man. And I said, God, I said, I just left 2 young people. They have a swimming pool outside and make like a heart. They have 3 cars there. One sleep upstairs and one sleep downstairs, yelling. And here's this man dying. But his spirit is so rich. And you know, how many times I have been taught in AA, how many times I have heard about living for today, about how precious it is to have been chosen in this life to have a free will. And that faith cannot be camouflaged even with sickness of death. That there is something mysterious of those who have it. It seems that it has been said that God will take the worst just to prove to the world how powerful and how lovable it can be. How so true for us. It is that type of peace. Number 3, to be invited here. When I was 34 years old, I was sleeping in a men's room in a hotel. The first thing that struck me when I walked into that room where I'm sleeping now, the bed is too big. I said, sometimes white man don't make sense. The bed is too big. And then I walk around over there 3 times last night, then I stop and say, Judge George, you would never believe this. Number 4, to be able to stand here, look about me. In my own eyes, I see so many strange faces, but in my own heart, I belong here. My life indeed has changed, but I repeat, it is my belief that God works best through people. It is my belief that it is with intention, that people should have right to choose, and God will never come in uninvited, because the essential ingredient that we must have for us to give is a free will, free to give love. And indeed, perhaps it was the best thing that ever happened to me the night I walked the doors of Alcoholics Anonymous. When I was in Maine, Channel 5 called me one time. They said, you have a news for us. I said, I do. They came over and they interviewed me for an hour and a half, and they made a special. They took pictures in reservation. They showed it at news for 3 nights in Massachusetts. People liked it so much, they made it special. And Steve Shaw won Award of the Year on the special that I taught half of that. A year later, I received a call from Sonia Hamlin, a lady who has an hour show in Boston. She said, Steve is celebrating his special. We want you to come here to celebrate with us. And here I am. If you see me laying in the sidewalk for 7 years with long hair and wine stores and dirty, would you believe that this could happen? I suppose, on the other hand, if you see me laying there with long hair and wine sores and dirty, you would never say, now there lies a perfectionist. I mean, you're not that smart. So I arrived at the airport to celebrate my special, and they picked me up. When I talk about white man, they brought a car that had about 8, 9 seats, and I'm all alone. I was looking for who else was going to get in there. So I get on, and I said to the chauffeur, would you draw me around the Dover Street? He said, Dover Street is the Skid Row. I said, yes. He says, why? I said, you'll never understand. But you know, in sitting down, I have to leave tomorrow morning, so I will not have a chance to listen to my friend Joe. But you know, I have a home to go to. And I have wife that I met in AA 17 years ago to go back home to, and my children. Not one of them ever been hungry. And my wife, a lot of people at one time didn't believe. My wife's never been ashamed to have walked with my name. And for me, I can only thank God and a lawyer who shook my hand and thousands of AA people in my past 23 years who tried to help me, who have helped me to be able to be here and to stand here and to be honestly say, thank you, God, and for so many people in AA for being here. Thank you very much.